Sergio Oliva Jr. made his first public appearance not in a hospital room or a family photo, but at the 1984 Mr. Olympia, a newborn held in the arms of his father, one of the most physically imposing figures in bodybuilding history. The crowd screamed, cameras flashed. It was the first time the world saw Sergio Oliva Jr., and he was days old. His father, Sergio Oliva Sr., was known as the Myth, a Cuban defector who had escaped Fidel Castro's regime. He built a physique widely regarded as among the most extraordinary in the sport's history, and remains the only man to have defeated Arnold Schwarzenegger at the Mr. Olympia. His son carried his name, his blood, and his genetics. But the household Sergio Jr. was born into was defined as much by dysfunction as by distinction. His father was emotionally withholding, and by his son's own account, deeply bitter. The home was torn by violence before Sergio Jr. was old enough to understand what had happened, and the name that the bodybuilding world celebrated would come to feel, for the man who bore it, more like a burden than a legacy. Sergio Oliva Jr. was born on October 20th, 1984 in Chicago, Illinois. His parents, Sergio Sr. and Arlene Garrett, were both competitive bodybuilders. His mother had won 3 female bodybuilding world championships and the Mrs. America title. At the 1984 Mr. Olympia, held weeks after his birth, Sergio Sr., then 43 and past his competitive prime, placed 8th. The crowd booed the judges. In the middle of that public uproar, Sergio Sr. was handed his newborn son on stage and held him in front of thousands of spectators. 2 years later, the marriage collapsed in violence. In 1986, Arlene shot Sergio Sr. 5 times with a .38 caliber handgun, all to the abdomen. Details of the confrontation remain disputed. The official account describes it as self-defense following an assault. Sergio Sr., despite his injuries, drove himself to the hospital and survived. He was 45 years old at the time. Sergio Jr. was 2 years old when it happened. The marriage continued until 1990, when Arlene filed for divorce and eventually relocated to North Carolina, where she built a career as an exercise physiologist. Sergio Jr. remained in Chicago with his father. The support that might be expected from a parent who had overcome poverty, political repression, a language barrier, and violent injury was not extended to his son. When Sergio Jr. expressed interest in bodybuilding, his father discouraged it without qualification. As Sergio Jr. stated in an interview with Muscle and Fitness, "Not only did he not want me to compete, but he didn't even want me to start working out, lifting weights, none of it." This withholding extended beyond bodybuilding. In multiple interviews, Sergio Jr. has described his father as unsupportive of his pursuits generally, pretty much of anything that I did, in his own words. His father held a narrow view of acceptable careers for his son. As Sergio Jr. recounted, the professions his father would have approved of were a baseball player, a lawyer, or a doctor, reflecting, Sergio Jr. noted, his Cuban background. The reasoning Sergio Sr. offered was tied to his own experience in the sport. He once told his son, "I went through so much, there's no way that my son's gonna struggle and go into this sport that screwed me over." He had watched bodybuilding consume his body, his finances, and his youth while withholding the recognition and financial reward he believed his accomplishments warranted. His opposition to his son's involvement in the sport was framed, at least in part, as protection. His son experienced it as a refusal to engage. Sergio Jr. was 20 years old when he walked into a gym and began training regardless. At that point, he weighed 140 pounds at 6 feet tall. 3 months later, he had added 30 pounds of muscle, a rate of development that pointed clearly to the genetics he had inherited, regardless of the circumstances under which he had finally been allowed to act on them. He entered his first competition in 2006, placing 3rd at the Southern USA Championship in the middleweight division. He won his first show in 2007. What followed was a long grinding passage through the amateur ranks, years of finishing second, of driving to shows in cities that drew little attention, of stepping on stage knowing that every judge in the room was measuring him against a standard he hadn't set. Everywhere Sergio Jr. competed, he wasn't only competing against the other athletes. He was competing against his father's legacy. Every judge who looked at him already carried a mental image of what an Oliva should look like. The impossibly small waist, the 23-inch arms, the proportions that made Sergio Sr. appear to exist outside the normal range of human anatomy. No matter how hard Sergio Jr. trained, he was being evaluated on terms that weren't designed for him. In a real sense, he was losing a competition he had never chosen to enter. He spent 9 years on the amateur circuit, 9 years of early mornings demanding training and financial sacrifice before earning his pro card at the 2015 NPC Nationals in Miami. For most athletes, that kind of persistence would be recognized as a measure of dedication. For Sergio Jr., those 9 years were framed, at least by the sport around him, as 9 years of failing to be his father. After his parents' divorce, Sergio Jr. grew up primarily with his father in Chicago. The man who lived in that house was not the triumphant champion the bodybuilding world celebrated. He was a man consumed by old grievances and unresolved anger that turned inward and toward those closest to him. Sergio Jr. has spoken about his father's relationships or lack of them with several of the sport's most prominent figures. Sergio Sr. carried deep resentment toward the IFBB, toward promoter Joe Weider, who controlled professional bodybuilding for decades, and toward Arnold Schwarzenegger, despite the fact that Schwarzenegger consistently spoke of his old rival with respect. Those grievances stretched back decades, rooted in financial disputes, perceived racial disrespect, and the sense that the sport had enriched those around him while leaving him comparatively broke. At one Olympia event, Jim Manion extended his hand to Sergio Sr. as a gesture of reconciliation. Sergio Sr. left it there. He turned his back and walked away. Sergio Jr. watched that moment and understood the weight behind it. He kept that grudge until the day he died, Sergio Jr. said. He was very bitter. Growing up in that household meant absorbing that bitterness. It meant living with a man who had calcified around his suffering and who could not or would not separate his own story from his son's. Sergio Jr. has said that he could not forgive how his father treated his mother, and that this became one of the deepest fractures between them. The domestic violence, the atmosphere of tension, the distance between the man the public saw and the man who existed inside that home. And yet Sergio Jr.'s account of his father is not one of simple condemnation. He has spoken about the man with a kind of aching respect, the way people speak about complicated figures they've spent years trying to understand. His biggest idol in bodybuilding remains Sergio Sr., the qualities he credits most for his own drive, his passion, his work ethic, his persistence, he traces back to his father. The man who caused him the most pain is also the man he has worked hardest to honor. In 2019, Sergio Jr. spoke publicly about something most professional athletes never disclose. He stated directly that he had gone through a period of profound darkness, a time when he genuinely did not care whether he lived or died. He had been experiencing thoughts of ending his life. A man with one of the most recognizable physiques in professional bodybuilding, the son of a three-time Mr. Olympia champion, sitting with the question of whether any of it was worth continuing. The pressure had accumulated over years, the ongoing comparisons to his father, the financial difficulties of his upbringing, the unresolved grief of losing Sergio Sr. on November 12, 2012, of kidney failure following months on dialysis, before the two of them had ever fully addressed what had happened between them. Sergio Jr. was 28 years old when his father died. Whatever conversation might eventually have taken place never did. In early 2023, while training in Dubai at the Kuwait Oxygen Gym, a facility known for producing elite-level athletes, Sergio Jr. was involved in a traffic incident that altered the course of that year. He was driving slowly in traffic, changing lanes when a delivery courier on a motorbike appeared between the vehicles and made contact with the side of his car. The man fell into the street. Before anyone could respond, a truck struck him. Sergio Jr. got out of his car and ran into one of the busiest streets in Dubai, narrowly avoiding being struck himself, trying to reach the man on the ground. An ambulance arrived. Officials indicated the man had a broken leg and would be transported to the hospital. The man died later that night or the following day from what were likely internal injuries. Sergio Jr., who had not acted negligently and who had responded with urgency, was detained by Dubai authorities. Under local law, when a death is connected to a vehicle, the driver is held until the case is reviewed by a judge, regardless of fault. There is no bail. He remained in custody for a week. He has said he is not able to discuss the conditions of his detention, but the way he has spoken about the experience suggests it was significant. He became ill. He did not know when it would end. His mind, he said, was going crazy. He had already been managing his own mental health struggles, years of accumulated pressure, and now this. He ultimately paid $10,000 in initial fees, and $50,000 in what Dubai law refers to as blood money, compensation to the deceased's family, which Sergio Jr. has said he did not object to paying. The judge classified it as a traffic violation. No criminal charges were filed. He was released. In 2018, Sergio Jr. was cast in the film Bigger, a biopic about Joe and Ben Weider, the brothers who built professional bodybuilding into the global industry it became. The role he was given was his own father. For a man with a complicated, unresolved relationship with a father who had died just 6 years earlier before any reconciliation had taken place, that assignment carried considerable weight. He was being asked to study his father's mannerisms, step in front of a camera, and portray him for a public audience. To inhabit professionally the person he had spent much of his life trying to distinguish himself from. Sergio Jr. has spoken about that experience with measured thoughtfulness. He acknowledged that the physical resemblance made the casting almost logical, but he was deliberate in drawing a line. "I may look like him," he said, "but I'm not like him at all." That statement functions as something more than a personal distinction. It is a declaration of a different set of choices. A son acknowledging that he carries his father's face, name, genetics, and legacy while having consciously chosen to conduct himself differently. As a person, as a potential father. In the private spaces that exist outside public attention, there is an additional layer of irony in the casting. Sergio Jr. has said he believes his father might have respected the acting career more than the bodybuilding one. Sergio Jr. was reportedly a devoted film enthusiast, a man who turned down a role in the 1987 film Predator because he found the creature costume unconvincing, but who loved cinema nonetheless. His son has suggested that a Hollywood career might have earned a degree of paternal approval that competing on stage never did. That the role he ultimately received was playing his father. In a story about an industry his father felt had wronged him, adds a layer of irony that is difficult to overlook. Sergio Jr. won the 2017 New York Pro Championship. He competed at Mr. Olympia in 2018, finishing 16th. He has also competed at the Arnold Classic. His record reflects genuine athletic ability developed through sustained commitment, not an inherited reputation but earned results. He has also been direct about the conditions that shaped him. He has spoken about growing up in financial hardship and about poverty having been a more powerful motivator than any competitive title. In a conversation with retired bodybuilding champion Flex Lewis, he made an observation that drew considerable attention. He believes he may be the last child of a Mr. Olympia winner who will have a realistic chance of winning the title himself. His reasoning is straightforward. As prize money in the sport increases and future generations of bodybuilding families grow up in greater comfort, the next wave of athletes will not have the same economic need driving them. He has argued that the desperation required to choose this life at the highest level came directly from the circumstances of his upbringing. He has also offered a statement that says more about his orientation toward the sport than his competitive record does. When asked about his motivation, he said, "I'm a bigger fan of the sport than I am a better bodybuilder." He competes for the people who approach him at shows and tell him what his father meant to them, for a sport that gave his family a great deal and also cost it considerably. He is, in some respects, competing to close out a story his father never finished on his own terms. To Mott included, he does so knowing that comparisons to Sergio Jr. are unavoidable, knowing that a 16th place finish at the Olympia will always be measured against a father who won it 3 times. He competes regardless. That is not a failure of self-awareness. It is a considered decision made in full view of the circumstances. When Sergio Oliva Jr. died in November 2012, the bodybuilding world mourned a significant loss. Arnold Schwarzenegger posted a tribute, calling him one of the greatest of all time, a true friend and a fierce competitor. Fans remembered where they were when they first encountered the myth. Articles were written, tributes filmed, and a legacy was cemented. In Chicago, a 28-year-old man was grieving in a way that combined grief, relief, and rage simultaneously, emotions that no tribute reel could adequately address. When the person with whom you have the most unresolved history dies before that history is resolved, the unresolved issues do not disappear. They simply have nowhere left to go. Sergio Jr. has never fully spoken about what those final years with his father were like. He has offered pieces, the bitterness, the grudges, the absence of support, the way Sergio Sr. treated his mother, the stubbornness that once led him to turn down a film role over a costume dispute that even the filmmakers could not resolve. Enough has been shared to understand that the relationship carried complications far deeper than a father simply opposing his son's choice to bodybuild. What stands out across these interviews is that Sergio Jr. has never fully condemned his father. He comes close at times, but consistently steps back. He locates the humanity in the situation. A Cuban immigrant who survived circumstances that would have overwhelmed most people, who carried those survival instincts into a domestic life that could not contain them, and who expressed love in the only way available to him, even when that expression resembled rejection. Sergio Jr. has done the harder work of understanding his father as a person, not only as a legend. That kind of understanding is a form of forgiveness most people never reach. The story of Sergio Oliva Jr. is not what it appears from the outside. It is not the account of a son benefiting from a famous name, nor the straightforward narrative of a young man disproving his critics. It is something more complicated than either. It is the account of a child born into violence and notoriety at the same time. Someone who grew up in the shadow of a legend's bitterness, who spent years trying to earn approval from a man too damaged to offer it. It is the story of someone who chose the very path his father rejected, and who has spent his adult life navigating both the recognition and the cost of that choice. It is the story of a man who reached a genuine low point, and decided that was not where his story would end. Sergio Sr. left Cuba with nothing and built something that by any measure should not have been possible. Sergio Jr. survived the consequences of his father's life and is building something that belongs entirely to himself. The names are the same, the path is entirely different. The real myth was never only the physique, it was always the story beneath it, the one that never appeared in the magazines or on the competition stage, the one that Sergio Jr. has been willing piece by piece to finally tell. What he does next is entirely his own, and that more than any competitive title is the point.